are really privileged to have with us Carl Schramm. He is the president and chief executive officer of the Kauffman Foundation, which is really one of the preeminent foundations in the country that puts a lot of emphasis on entrepreneurship and capitalism, both domestically and around the world. You may have seen him on CNBC or Fox or any number of other venues talking about these kinds of issues. He's written several books. He's written editorials in the Wall Street Journal, the Economist, and many places like that. So today you have the very wonderful privilege of hearing him talk about something he's really been thinking a lot about and writing a lot about in terms of expeditionary economics. So I was told to give him a very short introduction so he could take over from here. So I am going to now turn this over to Carl. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And as Linda said, I'll be talking to you graduates on Saturday. I timed this speech just 19 minutes. There are 2 jokes in it, but we'll tell whether or not whether you laugh or not. So if anybody would like to get into cahoots with me, I was trying desperately to steal a great line from Steve Forbes, who spoke at Claremont 5 or 6 years ago and ended his speech by saying, it's not who you know. Last thing he says to me, it's not who you know, it's whom you know. I'm going to try to be concentrated in what I say to you today, and I want to start with just one simple concentration about where I come from and how this work emerged. 8 years ago, I got to be president of the Kauffman Foundation. Now, foundations are weird organizations in American life. The reason is they never deal with markets. Our foundation is worth about $2 billion. That is almost a license for mischief. Because whatever we do, someone will say that's the greatest thing you ever did. They're grantees, right? And many foundations move around the world with all the best of intentions. I sometimes think about this as empathetic grant making. We try to do analytic grant making in the sense that our founder, Kauffman, created us as the first foundation ever to deal with the question of entrepreneurship. Now, Mr. Kauffman died in 1993, and the arc of his life was he was born in poverty in rural Missouri, and he dies a billionaire. He dies in 93. The concept of entrepreneur, the identity of entrepreneur has now come to life in the United States. Had he died in 1980, there would be no Kauffman Foundation focused on entrepreneurship because in 1980, the word was just not current. So Mr. Kauffman sees the arc of his life as having been born poor, dying rich. And he says, again and again, I'm the most common of people who's had an uncommon life. America let me become an entrepreneur. And by the way, if I could do it, move from the fringes of the economy to becoming a respected, wealthy business person, anybody could do this. So my bequest to the country is to turn these resources over to the project of making entrepreneurship a more common experience and a more accessible experience. Now, I suspect, I don't mean this in any kind of strange way, I actually never even thought about this before. And I won't say what was in my mind, but let me say that I do a lot of writing. Because I think it's in the writing that I do and the staff at the Foundation does, keeps us very focused on where our money ought to be going. That is to say, I think it's incumbent on us to have a theory of how the world works that we deal with before we apply money. Because if we don't, it could easily be that we apply money intent in one vector and in fact engendering quite the opposite. And the record of foundations is quite clear about that. Very clear about that, again and again. And from time to time, people have done very interesting critiques about this. And indeed, probably just a year ago in Foreign Affairs, there was a discussion about the Gates Foundation in Africa. And by doing what it does, creating new bureaucracy and so forth, the commentator in that particular article said, inadvertently, it pulls the great talent from these indigenous populations to work in bureaucratic organizations where if this didn't exist, these people would be applying their talents in the creation of the economies in these countries. Now, I relate that without judgment. I don't know if that's true or false, but it does fit at least a narrative of, without understanding things very clearly, you might do more harm than good. And thus, it's incumbent on us to be analytic. Now, I'm also of the view that analytic is one thing. Analytic is as analytic does. You don't really know what you know until you write it down. And hence, we really have a writing foundation. And a bunch of scholars work at Kauffman. And much of what you are beginning to understand about entrepreneurship in the American economy from the perspective of the centralmost event in economics, often overlooked, virtually always overlooked in most business schools. It's just not part of the complexion of what's in the curriculum. The singular event in economics is the formation of a firm. There is no economy without firms, essentially, no modern economy without firms. And it is the firm that is the unit by which innovation comes forward. So what I describe here is what it is that entrepreneurs do. They birth the new. I like to say that entrepreneurs tell us about needs inside the human family that we don't know we need. You know, some of you in the room are old enough to recall that it was not in your consciousness at one point in your life that you desperately needed a personal telecommuting platform that could go with you any place in the world. And even as you've had it, you know, this little machine, okay, which some older people in the room may think of as a telephone, is in fact a technology platform, as younger people in the room know, because you probably got 80,000 icons up there that tell you, you know, where your lever is right now, where the cheapest gas is, and whether or not there's one table left at your restaurant tonight. Okay? It's in fact a communicating platform, the dimensions of which we don't even understand. But what it is a vehicle for other entrepreneurs. It's an extraordinary vehicle for other entrepreneurs who are bringing forward applications, i.e. they're teaching us about needs we didn't know we needed. Okay, we didn't really know that we had to have, you know, that we could decide right this minute whether or not I could go and make a reservation at that restaurant, right? Or whether or not my dog has flies or fleas. Entrepreneurs also do something that's equally and more important, and that is they make jobs. And as you know from Kauffman research, virtually all new job creation in the United States is from firms that are less than 5 years old. And one of the reasons we're in the pickle we're in right now is in this recession, job formation, firm formation has fallen off for a time. We've seen that since the data have been compiled on firm starts in the business cycle. And the third thing they do is they make all the wealth, which shocks many economists, but firms make wealth. They are the great wealth machine, which descends, as your professors of law know, from the days of the Dutch creating this limited liability event. They make wealth. Now, one of the advances in Kauffman is we have actually promulgated some very interesting new economic theory. And I suspect in a nutshell what I want to do is talk to you about that because it's an introduction to this sort of new branch of economics behind me. And that is that the more new firms a nation has, the stronger and more likely its expansion of GDP will be. Now, economists do not know this. And one reason economists don't know this, i.e., differently put, one reason we could basically propagate this idea, invent this idea, see this idea, analyze towards this idea, and have the insight that it is because economists don't know much about growth. And this is an important fundamental point of what I'm going to talk about here. We don't know really how our American economy grew. We certainly don't know how to make another economy grow. USAID has been in this business since the Cold War, about 1960, and we have no data, there's no evidence ever that American efforts abroad have ever brought forth a strong economy. Now, my own theory is that our growth policy has always was formed in the time of the Cold War, and we let the Russians set the bar. That is to say, they didn't have any money. They went around using surrogate states. They gave just a little money. They gave a huge program, big public relations projects like the Aswan Dam in Egypt. But no one ever set the bar at developing an economy. And hence, those of you who study economic development understand what I'm just about to say. Our target when we have gone abroad with USAID and other foreign aid programs has always been subsistence economies. We'll just get them to the point where they can subsist by themselves. So we'll get indigenous agriculture going, and we'll have indigenous something going on, and they'll be stabilized because they'll sort of see that they can exist independent of the countries that will prop them up or subsidize life there. But differently, we have never ever gone abroad with a vision that we would propagate a growth economy like the American economy has been since the very beginning. I think this is particularly interesting because in 1989, when the Berlin Wall falls, so dominant is this vision that the world can only get to subsistence. It's some select few in the developed first world who can have these economies, that we never stop to say, well, maybe now that the Soviet alternative is over, we could in fact propagate growth economies and growth capitalism. But we didn't, for some mysterious reason. I think it's not so mysterious. I think we have volumes and volumes, stacks and stacks of volumes in every library about development economics. And development economics is taken as its premise that first, these economies can't grow. They're extractive, they're this, they're that. Not enough human capital. By the way, I would dare say, which I've said in print, you can't read this stuff continuously and not come to a view that with all the best intentions and all the political gloss and so forth, much of development theory is quite racist. You can't read it without seeing an implicit sense that these indigenous people can't be like us. There's something in the gene code that's special about those of us who came from Europe and came to America and we did it, and they can't. So we'll be good-hearted people, we'll get to subsistence. Now, I defy people to read the mass of this literature and come to a different conclusion. The second issue, which is more recent vintage, is we have in the intellectual circuitry of the United States and elsewhere, particularly in Europe, a growing aversion to growth. We don't think we like growth. Think of all the people who every time there's a G7 meeting, a G9 meeting, a G21 meeting, whatever it is, they go to Seattle. Who comes to Seattle with them? Thousands of people who hold up signs that when you take it all and you bubble it down, it says, "We hate growth." Interesting. It also has its own certain gloss of hypocrisy, in my view. That is, you know, rich kids in America whose father is an orthodontist flies to Seattle from Nashville, okay, to protest world growth after we got it, right? This is so bad you can't have it, right? I mean, it's just something that intellectually we have to quarrel with. What is this? Growth is good for us? No, not anymore, by the way. We grew a lot. This is fine. Now let's stop drilling for oil and all that other stuff. Anything that could cause us to grow. Let's propagate in our business schools that entrepreneurship is great, but social entrepreneurship is much greater, much more virtuous. Because they can't make money if they're running a social entrepreneurial venture. Okay. Now, of course, I'm doing this with hyperbole because the point I'm trying to illustrate is that in fact we have these conflicting means. And this is a newer meme that just didn't obtain in 1950 when Walt Rostow and others were writing the first tracts on development. Now, this has been an interest of mine and one of my colleagues, Bob Lighton. And some years ago, well, actually just 2 years ago, we wrote this book called Good Capitalism, Bad Capitalism. As I just joked with Dean Starr, today to turn it up like this one is perhaps, more coherent, okay? But anyway, and this book was written after the Soviet wall fell, and I was in Bob's office one day and I said, Bob, once upon a time we thought there were two forms of economies. There was market capitalism, and we were the best at it, and then there was the Soviet central planning, atheistic, all the other attributes that went through that, okay? I grew up in Catholic schools, so atheistic was the first of the descriptors, okay? And then the rest was godless, communism, okay? And when I went to graduate school, I learned there was something even worse about it, okay? It was centrally planned economies. And they never make anything happen because you got these 5-year plans, and Commissar Starr meets for 15 years with Commissar Linda over here, and a year later the press prints it, it's all misspelling, and nobody down in the Soviet farm even understands what this stuff is. Okay, you can't run an economy like that. So I said to Bob, go look at China. It's the places in China, the places in India that are flourishing look like they're parts of American capitalism. They came over and studied our entrepreneurial system, which is true, by the way. Okay, and great, extraordinary thing in China, not so much in India, because India, they're clear thinking and clear speaking about it. China, you have in certain parts of China, rabid Silicon Valleys. Okay, now it's not quite clear who owns it all, right? But they know to have growth, they had to do this. And these were explicit decisions that were made. Now at the same time, as we all are getting very aware, Japan, which was an extraordinary high growth country, is now like in its 12th or 13th year of total stagnation. They developed quite a different capitalism after the break in the late 80s, where they deficit spent themselves into total stagnation. The reason we're all watching Japan is Japan the movie that America is going to play, okay? But it's certainly a different type of capitalism. And then, of course, we go to the Russian system, which I don't know if it survived. Our editors at Yale were nervous about this. I can't tell them, I won't find it here. And the time I ever had that mysterious happening was taking the bar exam. Right? They would give out the statute. You get a whole little book like this with statutes, and then you get a question, right? And I opened the question in commercial transactions, and it said something about breaking bulk. I don't even know what that means. But I opened the statute book like this. God. Breaking bulk. In the first 4 sentences, I'm a slow reader, the first 4 sentences I read looked to me, they were like exactly the fact pattern. So I wrote it right down and I passed the bar exam. But I can't find the word. I think our editors at Yale took it out because we were going to call the Soviet system klepto-capitalism. It might be in there, I don't know if anybody's right. But anyway, the issue being the Aparchuks took over the system, and they owned it. It's pretty clear. It's pretty clear that in the end, we all know who owns everything, right? There. But the point is that the mechanisms of markets were actually morphing into types of capitalism. And I dare say we could go through a much more refined taxonomy and go from 4 to 8 or 16, I don't know. But it seems interesting that capitalism has now sort of escaped the bounds of what theory was about, and versions of it are permutating. And we wrote this book to sort of say, look, certain forms of capitalism can produce growth. State-controlled capitalism in China can produce growth to a certain point, right? The capitalism of Japan can't seem to grow anymore, okay? That's sort of the state-controlled, debt-based capitalism. And this was written in the days when American capitalism was riding high. And we characterize American capitalism as entrepreneurial capitalism. Now, let's turn to the slides in the work I'm recently doing. on expeditionary economics. This is the first term, this is the first use of this word. And actually, it's the first time I've ever lectured on this topic. I've done seminars at West Point and at the Council on Foreign Relations and so forth, but I've never lectured on the topic. I'm going to lecture on the topic with two of my colleagues at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, at the Command and General Staff College. Now, I didn't know this, so I'll presume most of you don't know this. That's actually the brains of the United States Army. The brains of the United States Army are at Fort Leavenworth, the intellectual core of the United States Army. And every major in the Army spends a year there. At any given time, something like an eighth of all the majors, these are people who are going to be professional officers, are at Fort Leavenworth for a year. This is like a master's degree. So if you think about the Army, West Point's a bachelor's degree, Fort Leavenworth is your master's degree, and then you go to Carlisle, Pennsylvania to the War College if you're going to be a general, not your PhD, right? One of the last commanders here, his last command before he went to Iraq was General Petraeus. If you run the War College, you are going to be, your next assignment is going to involve 2 stars. This is a very, very important place to pass through. In any event, I wrote a white paper because I had been at a conference in Washington, not even a conference, a lunch, not even a year ago. And I was asked to go with a bunch of economists, a small group of people, to talk to some people from the Defense Department who work for the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And the question that they were going to put to us economists was, what is America going to look like on the other side, excuse me, what is America's position in the world going to be on the other side of this recession? Everybody in the room had some relationship to the Defense Department except me. And people make bombs, they were there, right? Airplanes, they were there. Lawyers were running on this, who were contractors. Anyway, the questions were driving me insane. And at the very end, I said, look, I work for a foundation. We have all the money we need. We never take money from anybody. I'm going to ask an impertinent set of questions here. If you don't like me, never ask me back at that time. Okay, because I was at wit's end. I said, why would you turn to these economists? These are people who couldn't even tell us 18 months ago we were going to have a recession. Why didn't they were dumb then, but now they are brilliant seers of the future, particularly not even economics, the world order, political order. Well, that was sort of stunning. And then the second thing I said was, you know, if you're an economist, you can get away with total murder. If you say, try it yourself, because you don't have to be an economist to say it. You know, we don't take bar exams. You can call yourself an economist. Try it. At your next cocktail. Economists have such a bad reputation these days, I've actually gone the other way. I didn't say this to you, but maybe Saturday you'll introduce me as a social anthropologist. Okay. So, but I think as an economist you can try it in social situations. You know, it may work for you dating. It sounds smart. You might really think you're just sort of dull, but if you say to boyfriend, girlfriend, you know, I'm really an economist. Try it. You could write to me and tell me what happened. Anyway, so the next question I said is, look, I'd done a little homework. I said, if you look at growth, the whole world on a per capita basis is 3 times richer than it was in 1950. Did you all know that? We've been through an extraordinary expansion of wealth in the globe. Incidentally, by the way, in the last 25 years, we have wiped out at least 30% of the population. We didn't wipe them out. We have raised them up out of World Bank classification of poverty, destitute poverty. We are making huge gains against poverty, never ever done in history. Okay, so I said, look, you know, we're 3 times richer on average. And I said, if you go back to 1950 and you look at organized violence, it falls radically. Maybe there's such a concept of preventive defense that actually connects to economic growth. I think there may be people in the room who've yet to take the second breath, and that was a year ago May. Okay? Okay, but if you draw out these 2 lines, the correlation is astounding. Well, then the lunch ended. And I was taught something right there about our military. If I'd have said that in a seminar room in a university, half the people in that room would have walked out ready to annihilate me with ad hominem criticism. I had attacked something, or I had revealed people who should know something and didn't. This would be seen, and I've taught in fancy universities. I was a professor at Johns Hopkins for 15 years. You wouldn't say that type of thing oftentimes in a faculty meeting because you got to live with these people. And they don't like to have someone suggest that they don't know everything about everything. Okay? So you have to be very cagey and so forth. At the end of this, two different people, completely different parts of the room, came up to me and one person said, "Dr. Schramm, you won today's luncheon." Wow. I never asked a question in my life. I said, "You won." Okay, we keep score here. Somebody else said, "You know, if you could sort of write to us a little memo." So I wrote one of those little memos. It turned out to be 28 pages by the time I was done with it in August. And it was called Economics in the Post-Conflict Situations. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is what the distillate boiled down to is the version of it that's actually going to be published will be out in a couple of weeks in Foreign Affairs. It's called Expeditionary Economics. And I forget what the subtext is. But anyway, it says something about post-conflict and disaster situations because it's the same thing in Haiti. If we had these ideas with us as we approach Haiti, if we had these ideas as we approached Iraq. Now, in a nutshell, let's just put this in a larger tableau. Iraq is very, very interesting for thousands of different reasons. I would bring your attention to a brand new piece that's in the brand new issue of Vanity Fair about General Petraeus. Because General Petraeus goes off to run this war and discovers that, for all kinds of reasons, that there's a huge amount of literature. The people in the military write like crazy. It's astounding how much intellectual activity goes on and how much writing goes on, particularly in the Marines. General Petraeus went with a very open mind, and he was a very curious, and he's a China broker. And he gets there and he finds that we're not making any progress. We're terrific at occupying. We had the place taken mission accomplished, right? And then we couldn't get pacification. And it is Petraeus who writes a field manual. It's a fantastic book. You can buy it. American Doctrine. He writes the field manual on counterinsurgency. So everybody, by the way, one of the things we do in the United States is we have our doctrine. Okay, the Brits don't do this, nobody else does. You can go to the bookstore here at Pepperdine and buy, because it's printed by the University of Chicago Press, our doctrine on counterinsurgency. But the point I want to make is, we got there, he gets there and says, we need a second competency. We can take the country over, but how do we pacify the country? And in context, what I want to suggest here is what's on the board here. Is a third competency we didn't know we needed, and that is we have to establish sustainable economies. Now, the real twist here is, if you're going to establish sustainable economies, they shouldn't be subsistence economies. We should actually propagate growth theory. Because if we have a growing economy, and Bosnia tells us this, since we left Bosnia, we moved in and did the regular thing. Boatfuls of money, billions of dollars went over to establish the economy. We've done this before in Haiti. Billions of American aid dollars, right? But if you if you deploy these dollars on a mental construct, that growth won't happen here. We just have to have subsistence. You'll never get growth. I think Yogi Berra said something about this, right? You know, if you come to a fork in the road, take it. Or another twist on this is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Okay? And there you have it. So what I wanted to show you here was just sort of a new sort of set of thoughts, hardly filled out, hardly complete, that basically suggests that when we go abroad on an expedition, we ought to know what the economy is going to look like at the back end of it. Now this, I think, is more the case than ever, because most of our wars anymore are caused by the disintegration of states, the failed state. This is probably of no consequence if, God forbid, we have to fight an existential war. All right? We're not going to fight a war with China. We're worrying about the economy on the other side of it, right? But if we're going to have successful expeditions that are successful in terms of at the back side of it, what do we envision we want? And what this says is, what we ought to envision we want is a small American economy that's on its way to indigenous growth where people own it, they make wealth, welfare is expanding, per capita income in real terms is moving up, and the infection of making their own destiny economically is taking hold. Now imagine if we had done that, again, back in 1989. If we had just said, well, let's experiment with this model and go 3 places, 4 places. Suppose we went to the Sudan or Yemen. And we had, after 10 years, which we could have done, 3 or 4 or 5 signaled firms established in those places. If anybody knows anything about India, the signal firms that have happened in India transformed India's consciousness. There are firms like Tata, there are firms like Infosys. Infosys is an extraordinary firm. Now, it's an international supplier of software solutions, but it was created by Indians in Bangalore and became astonishingly competitive. By the way, they had to fight the government to bring in, for 4 years they had to fight the government to bring in an antique computer from the United States to be the basis of that. But there's not a soul in India, certainly in your circumstances at the university level, who doesn't want to work at Infosys, but more importantly says, hey, we were a post-colonial forgotten place. American policy said we'd be lucky if we could survive. In fact, the American policy, when I went through college, by the way, when I went through college for graduate school, you know what was taught by the eminent professors of this stuff? There would never be growth in India, and there would never be growth in China, ever. You know why? Because the Hindu religion was not tolerant of growth, and Confucianism, the culture of China, had no part of competition and growth. This was our understanding of things. And it's a very important thing. It's important for all of you who are going to graduate. It's important for all of you guys who think that what you always learn all the time from professors is right. Okay? Because oftentimes it's disastrously wrong. It's propagated, it's endorsed by foundations. You know, I know some of you are chuckling. This is the chuckling of nervousness. Okay? And it's appropriate. It's appropriate. Because a lot of times the claptrap that comes along with authority makes you believe things that turn out not to be true. You know, in any given time, we think about politicians, we think about professors, we think about other people as authority pronouncers, right? They have all the experts around them, they've read everything. They went to Harvard, they went to Yale, they really know. Come on. You know, the search for knowledge is tremendously human, and the creativity is widely dispersed and randomly dispersed. People can be smart anywhere. The real trick about being smart is the Jesuit trick. Always, always question the premise. And the premise we should have questioned was, are you sure? Wait a minute. People from India own 7-Elevens in the United States. How are you telling me that this culture is antithetical to competition and free markets? And the evidence was there. So, let us move here to the elements of what this expeditionary economic stuff is. And if you see from civil wars, is what conflict is all of a sudden since 1950 forward. And interstate wars are less and less consequential. And extra-state wars, people making war on each other, the yellow line, is not moving. Now, if we had more data, which I don't have here, we don't have this slide, we could again draw those charts that show organized violence falling like this, while per capita income, global per capita income, rising like that. Okay, let me zip to 2 more slides. Oh, I'm going backward, excuse me. That's a great one. The history of lighting. What we're making there is technology matters, I guess. And that's how hard you have to work for one to study. See, so you're supposed to draw the conclusion that aren't you lucky to be living now as opposed to 500,000 BC? All right, how hard you work for food. Notice right here, if you're a rabid reader of the Wilson Quarterly, you happen to know that this is where America starts to get obese. 1979 to 1981. What happens in that period of time? This has nothing to do with this lecture. This is just free confetti, intellectual confetti. What happened between 1979, 1981?
The Big Mac.
No, but you're close. In 2 years, 80% of households have a microwave oven. Okay? So there you have it. See, economists can explain everything. I'm sure you're running off to your favorite watering hole this evening in your testing trans theory. Oh, hi. I bet you never dated an economist. You bet your life I haven't. If you're going to grow up and look like that, beat it, Buster. Okay. All right. Now, yeah, here's my favorite chart. Okay. What this chart says is we give you money, you don't grow. That's the history of aid funding, right? You get our money, you get negative growth. And the third chart takes us to actually what I was writing about today before I came over. We don't really have a context of development. In fact, if you read Economists, we do context-free advice for development. That is to say, money's money, so you all need investment. This is Jeffrey Sachs at Columbia. His vision is all the rich companies just send money to poor companies, and the world is at peace. Watch this drama. Only matter of time until there's a Peace Prize for this malarkey. Okay? Only matter of time. That labor is labor. It's indigenous labor. You can't do much about it. And technology is technology. In any type of economic system. And the result is that foreign aid bears an uncanny resemblance to the very system. 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 Bears an uncanny resemblance. When I said bears an uncanny resemblance to the very system. Bears an uncanny resemblance forth into the very system. Bears an uncanny resemblance to the very system. Bears an uncanny resemblance to the very system. Bears an uncanny resemblance to the very system. There's 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 an uncanny resemblance. In 2004, our government paid Arthur Andersen. Okay, you business guys, tell me what is Arthur Andersen? It's an audit firm. Audit. You know auditors? All right. Don't go to the bar tonight and say, hey, I'm an auditor. All right? An audit firm. Okay? We paid them $400+ million for the plan as to how to start the Iraqi economy. An audit firm? They don't even have economists, which may be good. Okay? In that plan, if you can imagine it, could have been written in the Soviet Union in 1960. First you do this, and you do this amount of that. And then you do this, and you do this amount of it. And this is what it looks like in that province, and this is what it looks like in this province. So today, if you go to Iraq, you get in a helicopter, you fly over Iraq, it looks like you're flying over Iowa. Long, long, long rows of industrial farming. You wouldn't have seen that 10 years ago. Because it's not indigenous agriculture. And what it reflects is somebody's thought over at the State Department that we'll grow this type of stuff, wheat, if you can imagine it, okay? And we'll take it to the world market. Now, You know, the one commodity you don't take to the world market is wheat, right? We subsidize farmers not to grow it, okay? You know, most of the pasta flour that you eat from that box is fatto in Italia, right? Was grown in Kansas, put on a boat, sent to Palermo, runs through the factory, they put it in a box, they ship it back to Kansas, okay? That's what we're really good at. But some planner thought, first for us, should work for them. Let's get them into the regrowing business. Now, do you see the mischief that comes out of this? But that's what planning does. And planning works like that way because there's no feedback, except when it's too late. So when the world price of wheat falls, these people are dead out of luck. And who did that? It's the mischief of the plan. Now, this theory up here that we propagate in our American universities can't explain what happened here. Remember I said before, we don't know what made it here and we can't go make it someplace else. You can't explain the Asian countries. They didn't have aid. They're growing faster than everybody else. The aid that went to India was inconsequential. Incidentally, by the way, the great thing that we did for India, we think we did for India. We let Indian students come to American universities. We dealt with their human capital, and we inculcated expectations and experiences of what India could look like. You know, I mentioned emphasis. Where did all the emphasis guys go to school? In the US of A. We don't even see clearly how important the human capital resource is. But look here. Asia does it with their own savings. Incidentally, that's what we did in America. If we were to transport ourselves back to Philadelphia and choose the year 1779, we couldn't go down to the dock in Philadelphia and see the schooner come in loaded with gold from the London offices of XYZ venture capitalists. They're not over there in London saying, hey, boy, this is a developing country, we'll buy up America. We did it. White people can still do it. Bootstrapping. But you know what happens is we press that notion out. Now the Asians didn't buy into this. And look at Asian savings rates compared to ours. They're still doing it. It helps explain why we owe all our money to. This helps you understand the world debt relationships. And foreign direct investment, it was mostly imported technology and know-how. To wit, the emphasis story once again. All right? So all of this, as I said before, descends on people who have a very pragmatic mindset. These are our officers and our troopers on the ground who want to see good things happen, in part because they want to get out. But many times the intellectuals in the military see good things that have to happen lest there's no stable exit ever. We can get the troops up. We're going to do that this summer. But whether or not we're happy with what Iraq looks like next year, 5 years from now, will all have to do with what this economy was. And we should have an arresting sense that if Bosnia is this model, which it is, you know, Bosnia is on the edge of total blowing apart all over again. So anyway, these are the footings of this new sort of discipline. And you could tell I'm sort of absorbed by this. You know, I've given a lot of time to this and I'm kind of excited by this because I think it's really important. It's one of the things economists get to do. If they work at this, they get to work on kind of important projects. And I think the takeaway, because a lot of you were students and some of you were faculty, was made before. That is, you can't take everything as givens. You know it's in books. Books are very deceptive. You know, some of you think I'm smarter than I am because my name's on the cover of a book. You know, it's sort of a heroic accomplishment. It's kind of not, it's not human. You know, not everybody can do it. I've been there. You know, I've met people who wrote books before I wrote one and said, you know, I wish I could have been that smart. Right? But there's stuff in here that's probably wrong. The next book will be better because I think we operate with the sense that there's stuff in here that's wrong. Okay? And, you know, the minute you put down writing a book, it becomes very addictive in the sense that you gotta make it better, you know, because getting here made you this much smarter, and now, you know, if you have an obligation to your fellow man, you think you go, oh, you better refine those thoughts and so forth. And also, what happens with books these days, that also happens in a much more loose and undisciplined way through the internet, is your conversations be so wide, you get much, much smarter. The greatest thing that happened here was the discovery that once I sent this white paper to the Pentagon, loads of people started to send me thoughts. And they're not defensive thoughts. They're not saying, like, you know, you never served, you don't know what to talk about. You know, I've been in Mosul and Kabul, and, you know, it's quite the opposite. It's actually touching in many regards. I had, from a previous book, a guy right from Iraq saying, you know, your book should be read by every soldier here. Because everything you talk about in the entrepreneurial imperative is what we're not doing. Okay? We will never get this economy started, right? So sometimes you write stuff and you get sort of mail that comes in and says, you know, it's of consequence. I appreciate what you wrote and so forth. So it puts you in the stream of the human family in a different way, and you know, it gives you the sense that maybe if you're honest to yourself, you're intellectually honest, you go at this humbly, understanding you ain't got the last word on any of this. Always opening questions, saying maybe it would work better this way. Also being courageous enough, I don't mean to be self-flattering because I'm not, but to say, you know, you guys are wrong.